On the humid night of April 17, 2009, staff at the Coral Continental Hotel in Khartoum, Sudan, discovered a body sprawled across the floor of a dimly lit suite. That man was Sadiq Raza, a reputed recruiter for Hamas, whose sudden death would ignite a chain of whispers stretching from the corridors of intelligence agencies to the offices of world leaders. He was found dressed in a neatly pressed white shirt, his suitcase still unpacked, his phone silenced on the nightstand. At first glance, the death appeared routine, perhaps a heart attack or exhaustion from constant travel. But the details soon began to unsettle. The room bore no sign of struggle, yet the locks showed evidence of tampering. The curtains were drawn tightly, though hotel staff remembered them open earlier that day. Surveillance cameras showed him returning to his room at 9:43 p.m., but never leaving again. Khartoum police sealed the floor, but word spread quickly among journalists and diplomats lodged in the same building. Who was this man whose death required such secrecy? Why did whispers circulate among foreign embassy staff before the Sudanese authorities even arrived? Within hours, phone lines buzzed across Cairo, Tel Aviv, and Washington. What began as a simple hotel discovery was now treated as a potential act of state-sponsored elimination. The body of Sadiq Raza would soon be lifted onto a stretcher, but the mystery surrounding his final hours had only just begun. The death of Sadiq Raza mattered far beyond the walls of a Sudanese hotel. He was not simply another transient guest, but a crucial link in the covert machinery that funneled recruits, funds, and ideology into the armed wings of Hamas. His role was silent, yet decisive, stitching together a transnational network that stretched from the refugee camps of Gaza to the political salons of Tehran. For Israel, Raza represented more than a recruiter. He symbolized the endless cycle of militant replenishment that made every assassination, every military strike, seem futile. If recruiters like him thrived, the pipeline of operatives would never run dry. For Hamas, his presence in Sudan signaled a deliberate outreach, using Africa as a staging ground, a sanctuary, and a financial hub shielded from constant bombardment. The stakes reached beyond regional battlefields. Intelligence analysts in London, Berlin, and Washington understood the global implications. If a man like Raza could operate so freely in Khartoum, it revealed both the vulnerability of African states and the persistence of clandestine networks despite surveillance, sanctions, and wars. The corridors of power feared what such a death suggested, that Mossad had extended its reach into Sudanese soil, a bold escalation with unpredictable diplomatic fallout. The incident threatened to inflame Sudanese-Israeli tensions, complicate Egyptian mediation, and draw Iran further into the shadows of the conflict. What unfolded in that hotel room was not merely a death. It was the spark of an international reckoning, carefully hidden beneath the cover of a heart attack. Who had slipped unseen into the Coral Continental Hotel that night? Was it a lone operative with a vial of poison, or a team of professionals trained to vanish like smoke? Did Sudanese intelligence look the other way, or were they themselves deceived? Why strike in Khartoum, a city often ignored by the world stage yet central to so many hidden games? Was the goal to cut the threads of Hamas's recruiting web, or to send a chilling message to every operative who believed Africa was beyond Israel's reach? Could it have been rivals within Hamas, settling disputes masked as foreign assassinations? Or was it truly Mossad, flexing its invisible hand, proving once again that borders and laws were fragile obstacles to their designs? The questions multiplied faster than the answers. Every new possibility revealed the scale of shadow wars fought in silence, wars where hotel rooms became battlegrounds, and where death arrived not in gunfire, but in silence, precision, and plausible deniability. One truth lingered. Whoever orchestrated the death of Sadiq Raza had shifted the balance of fear, and in espionage, fear itself was often the most potent weapon. Sadiq Raza was born in 1971 in the densely populated neighborhood of Shuja'iyya, Gaza City, a place where childhood was framed not by playgrounds and abundance, but by rubble, barricades, and curfews. His family belonged to the working poor, his father a tailor whose shop often remained closed due to frequent clashes, his mother a quiet homemaker who instilled in him a devotion to faith. Life in Gaza meant that political struggle was not a distant concept, but a daily rhythm, punctuated by the sounds of military patrols and the distant thud of explosions. From an early age, Raza displayed sharp intelligence and an insatiable curiosity. Teachers at his local madrasa remembered him as a boy who memorized scripture with precision, yet also showed a keen interest in stories of warriors and resistance figures. He grew up listening to elders recount tales of dispossession, of families forced from ancestral homes, and of the humiliations endured under occupation. These narratives seeped into his identity, forming a lens through which he viewed the world. The household was strict, guided by tradition, yet also marked by quiet resilience. The children were taught discipline, obedience, and a reverence for sacrifice. Neighbors recalled that Raza was often the one to intervene in disputes, quick with words, but slow to laughter. He carried himself with a seriousness that seemed beyond his years. By the age of 12, he was already known in his quarter as someone destined for larger things, though none could yet define what path he would walk. The first intifada erupted when Raza was only 16. The uprising against Israeli control transformed his adolescence into a battlefield of ideas and loyalties. Where others saw chaos, he saw clarity. The stones thrown by boys his age were not acts of desperation, but symbols of dignity reclaimed. The confrontations he witnessed during those formative years would carve a permanent scar on his psyche, embedding the belief that life was to be lived in resistance, no matter the cost. As he matured, Sadiq Raza's worldview crystallized into a blend of religious conviction and revolutionary pragmatism. He believed that faith was inseparable from politics, that the Quran provided not only spiritual guidance but also the framework for armed struggle. For him, resistance was not merely tactical, it was sacred. His ideology mirrored that of Hamas's emerging leadership, a rejection of compromise, a mistrust of negotiations, and a conviction that survival depended on perpetual confrontation with Israel. Yet behind the hardened beliefs lay personal quirks that made him more than a faceless operative. He was meticulous in habits, known to fold his clothes with geometric precision, to arrange his notebooks by size, and to sharpen pencils before every writing session. He carried a small wooden misbaha, prayer beads, always in his pocket, running them through his fingers even during tense discussions. Associates recalled his tendency to eat sparingly, often declining lavish meals in favor of simple bread, olives, and tea, a trait that symbolized both austerity and discipline. Despite his seriousness, Raza possessed a keen memory for names, dates, and minor details, which earned him quiet respect in organizational circles. He disliked loud arguments, preferring calm persuasion, but beneath the composure lay an unyielding stubbornness. Once he decided a course of action, persuasion became nearly impossible. Friends noted his solitary walks at night through alleys of Gaza, his mind often adrift, murmuring lines of poetry about loss and endurance. These habits, seemingly minor, gave a glimpse into a man who fused ordinary human detail with the implacable rigidity of ideology. Within the circles of Gaza, Sadiq Raza began to acquire names that reflected both admiration and fear. Among his peers, he was called Al-Mujanid, the recruiter, for his uncanny ability to persuade hesitant youths into embracing the cause. Older militants referred to him as the teacher, a title born from his talent for weaving scripture, history, and personal stories into compelling narratives that transformed listeners into followers. Each nickname reinforced the duality of his role: mentor and mobilizer, scholar and strategist. In private, however, Raza cultivated a different self-image. He saw himself less as a warrior and more as a builder of legacies, someone who could shape the architecture of resistance without firing a weapon. He reportedly told confidants that a fighter can kill one man, but a recruiter can create 1,000 fighters. That belief formed the bedrock of his identity and gave him a sense of purpose far beyond the battlefield. His ego was measured, not flamboyant, but beneath the modesty lay a quiet pride. He considered his ability to inspire and organize as a divine calling, proof that his life was guided by destiny, not chance. The transition from idealistic youth to hardened militant did not occur overnight for Sadiq Raza. It was shaped by a series of encounters that slowly pushed him from community activism into the orbit of armed politics. In the early 1990s, as Hamas consolidated its networks across Gaza, Raza was drawn into student groups aligned with the movement. His talent for oratory made him stand out at rallies, where his speeches carried both fire and restraint, the voice of someone who could inspire without losing control. By 1994, when the Oslo Accords stirred controversy across Palestinian society, Raza emerged as a vocal critic of compromise. He denounced negotiations as illusions designed to weaken the spirit of resistance. That period marked his first significant step into organizational life, as Hamas leaders recognized his potential not as a fighter, but as a recruiter who could bridge generational divides. He began operating workshops disguised as cultural gatherings, where he would test the convictions of young men, gradually filtering those suited for deeper involvement. The gradual shift into politics was also influenced by his exposure to Sudan during his early travels. There, he encountered Islamist networks that framed resistance as part of a broader global struggle. These experiences deepened his sense that Palestine's battle was connected to wider conflicts stretching from Cairo to Khartoum and Tehran. By the late 1990s, Raza was no longer merely a community figure. He had become a link in a chain, an essential cog in the machinery of recruitment, logistics, and ideology that fueled Hamas's survival. By the dawn of the 2000s, Sadiq Raza had crossed the line from quiet organizer to active conspirator. His first brushes with the law came not through spectacular acts of violence, but through the subtler currents of clandestine work. In 2001, Israeli intelligence traced his involvement in forging travel documents for couriers moving between Gaza and Sudan. Though never directly apprehended, his name appeared in Shin Bet interrogation files, marked with a note: facilitator, recruiter, high potential. In 2003, Egyptian authorities detained him briefly in Sinai after intercepting a convoy smuggling medical supplies that concealed communications equipment bound for Gaza. Officially, he was released for lack of evidence, but the episode underscored his growing confidence in using humanitarian fronts as cover for militant logistics. His profile began to rise, though he remained cautious, always preferring shadows to limelight. The most significant early clash came in 2005, when Jordanian security services arrested a group of Palestinians accused of attempting to funnel money into Hamas. Among the confiscated notebooks was Raza's handwriting, detailing codes for transfers and recruitment rosters. Although he never faced trial, his association with the case marked him in the eyes of regional intelligence agencies as a dangerous intermediary. These encounters with law enforcement did not deter him. Instead, they reinforced his belief that imprisonment and scrutiny were rites of passage for those serving the cause. For Raza, every arrest, every seized shipment, was not a defeat, but a test of resilience. The pattern was set: a man pursued, questioned, and shadowed, yet always slipping away, leaving behind fragments of evidence that hinted at larger operations yet to be uncovered. Though Sadiq Raza often evaded long imprisonment, he did endure several short detentions that became central to the mythos surrounding him. In 2006, Egyptian intelligence held him for 3 months in a Cairo facility, accusing him of aiding Hamas operatives transiting through Sudan. Official records described routine questioning, yet Raza's later accounts painted a far darker picture. He spoke of nights chained to a chair, of electric shocks administered to extract names, of interrogators threatening to make him vanish into the desert without trace. These stories, whether exaggerated or true, spread quickly among sympathizers. They cast him as a survivor of cruelty, a man who could withstand torment without betraying his comrades. Within Gaza, his brief imprisonment elevated his reputation from recruiter to martyr in waiting, someone tested by fire yet unbroken. Raza himself leveraged these claims carefully. He never wallowed in them, but allowed the rumors to circulate, feeding the perception of his indestructibility. In militant circles, endurance under torture became a badge of honor, and Raza wore it quietly, allowing others to speak of his suffering. In truth, detention only hardened his resolve. What intelligence services intended as a deterrent became instead fuel for his conviction. After his release from Egyptian custody in 2006, Sadiq Raza moved deeper into the infrastructure of Hamas. No longer content with the role of passive recruiter, he began to weave himself into the movement's organizational fabric. His strength lay not in wielding a rifle, but in creating networks that could supply those who did. He was formally integrated into the Dawah committees, the social and educational arms of Hamas, which served as both cover and incubator for new operatives. By 2007, following Hamas's takeover of Gaza, Raza's function expanded beyond local neighborhoods. He became instrumental in linking Gaza-based cells with external financiers, especially in Sudan, Yemen, and the Gulf. His reputation as a reliable bridge earned him trust from senior figures who valued discretion as much as loyalty. Colleagues later recalled that he avoided public gatherings, preferring to meet in small apartments or crowded cafes where conversations blended into background noise. Though not a founder in the traditional sense, Raza shaped sub-networks within Hamas that functioned almost like autonomous groups. These cells focused exclusively on recruitment and logistics, bypassing conventional hierarchies to report directly to him or his intermediaries. Intelligence sources described his networks as quiet armies, invisible until mobilized. His influence was such that some began to regard him as the architect of a parallel apparatus, a hidden infrastructure that guaranteed Hamas would never run short of fresh fighters. By cultivating ties abroad while nurturing loyalty at home, Raza positioned himself as a central figure in the expansion of Hamas's reach. He had become both organizer and innovator, bridging the gap between ideology and operational survival. His networks would soon serve as conduits for escalation into more dangerous realms of militancy. By the late 2000s, Sadiq Raza's operations had moved far beyond recruitment. He became a pivotal actor in Hamas's external activities, orchestrating smuggling routes that threaded through Sudan, Eritrea, and the Sinai Peninsula. These channels delivered weapons, cash, and forged documents into Gaza, often hidden in convoys marked as humanitarian aid. Israeli intelligence later alleged that entire shipments of Iranian-supplied rockets passed through networks under his supervision, each delivery expanding Hamas's reach and lethality. His work was not limited to material support. Raza oversaw cells tasked with kidnappings, often targeting local collaborators or suspected informants. Victims were dragged into safe houses, interrogated, and either released with warnings or executed. The kidnapping served dual purposes: gathering intelligence and instilling fear. Survivors described him as eerily calm, delivering orders without raising his voice, watching interrogations with a detached demeanor that suggested efficiency mattered more than cruelty. Killings followed, usually carried out by men under his command. Though Raza seldom pulled a trigger, his fingerprints were on the decisions that ended lives. In 2008, the abduction and execution of a Gaza shopkeeper accused of aiding Israeli forces was traced back to his network. The same year, Sudanese police discreetly noted his presence in Port Sudan during an operation that ended with 3 bodies dumped in the desert, all linked to financial disputes within smuggling pipelines. With each act, his aura deepened. He was not the warrior seen on propaganda posters, but the strategist behind shadows, orchestrating operations that blurred the lines between militancy, crime, and geopolitics. For Mossad and allied services, these escalations transformed him from recruiter into a high-value target whose elimination was deemed both urgent and inevitable. The trail of Sadiq Raza's operations can be mapped through a series of meticulously executed incidents that revealed both his ambition and reach. On March 12, 2007, Egyptian Border Patrol intercepted a convoy near Rafah. Hidden beneath crates of flour were dismantled rocket components. Intelligence documents later confirmed that the shipment was coordinated by Raza, who had used a Sudanese freight company as the cover. On September 4, 2008, in Port Sudan, witnesses reported a tense standoff between rival smuggling crews. 3 men were later found dead in the desert, their bodies bearing signs of execution. Sudanese police reports, though never publicly released, identified Raza as a mediator turned mastermind, orchestrating the purge to secure control over the pipeline. In January 2009, an attempted kidnapping in Gaza City targeted a suspected informant. The victim escaped, but testimony to Israeli authorities described Raza as present at the safe house, calmly questioning the captive before ordering subordinates to apply pressure. The failed operation nonetheless reinforced his reputation as someone directly involved in counterintelligence enforcement. The most significant episode occurred on February 18, 2009, when Israeli jets struck a convoy of trucks in eastern Sudan. Dozens were killed, and the cargo, believed to be weapons bound for Gaza, was obliterated. Though Israel never confirmed it, regional intelligence insisted that Raza had personally overseen the convoy's assembly. Surviving documents listed his alias among organizers. This incident marked him irreversibly, a man in Mossad's crosshairs, responsible for bridging Sudanese soil with Gaza's war machine. Each date, each operation, left a paper trail and a whisper. Together they mapped the steady escalation of a figure whose shadow stretched across borders, transforming him from recruiter to architect of a dangerous transnational network. By 2010, Sadiq Raza's name was no longer confined to the margins of intelligence reports. It appeared in dossiers circulated between Israel's Shin Bet, Mossad, and military intelligence units. His role as recruiter had evolved into that of an indispensable architect, linking Gaza to far-reaching networks in Africa and the Middle East. Israeli analysts concluded that as long as men like Raza operated freely, Hamas's ability to replenish fighters and secure weapons would remain unbroken. The designation of Raza as a priority target began quietly. In 2008, the United States Treasury listed several Sudan-based entities suspected of channeling funds to Hamas, and within those reports, his aliases surfaced. European intelligence services also flagged his frequent movements through Khartoum, Addis Ababa, and Sana'a. Each new piece of evidence reinforced the conclusion that he was not only a facilitator, but a strategist operating under diplomatic shadows. By 2009, his inclusion on watch lists was formal. Interpol circulated notices under multiple names: Sadiq Ahmed, Khaled Raza, and Al-Mujanid. These aliases reflected his skill in manipulating identities, but also exposed his growing notoriety. Airlines were instructed to flag his boarding passes, and financial institutions were ordered to block suspicious transfers linked to his known companies. For Mossad, such international recognition provided both opportunity and cover. Publicly, Raza was a recruiter. Privately, he was labeled a destabilizing force whose removal could tilt the balance in Israel's favor. As his face circulated in secure intelligence bulletins, his movements became the subject of coordinated surveillance. The walls were closing in. The transformation from organizer to most wanted man was complete. Long before his death in Khartoum, there were attempts to silence Sadiq Raza. The first serious effort came in 2007, when a roadside explosion ripped through a convoy outside Rafah. Officially, it was attributed to rival smugglers, but Israeli analysts insisted the device bore the hallmarks of Mossad design: pressure triggers, precision placement, and selective detonation. Raza escaped with minor injuries, though 2 of his associates were killed instantly. In 2008, while traveling under an alias in Yemen, he was targeted again. A drone strike obliterated a vehicle thought to be his, only to reveal later that intelligence had been miscalculated by mere minutes. Raza, traveling in a second car, watched from a distance as flames consumed his intended coffin. That night, his reputation as the man who could not be killed spread across militant circles. Another plot unfolded in 2009, this time in Port Sudan. According to later leaks, an agent posing as a European businessman attempted to slip a slow-acting toxin into his drink during a late-night meeting. Suspicious of the man's mannerisms, Raza excused himself abruptly, leaving behind an untouched glass. The agent vanished, and Sudanese security quietly reported the encounter as a foiled foreign intrusion. Each attempt deepened Raza's paranoia. He altered routines, shifted hotels without notice, and rarely slept in the same apartment twice. Phones were used once, then discarded. He traveled with layered escorts, never trusting a single guard. But each escape also emboldened him, convincing followers that divine providence shielded him from assassins. For Mossad, however, failure did not mean defeat. It meant recalibration. Every botched strike yielded intelligence. Travel habits, favored safe houses, trusted couriers. By surviving, Raza unknowingly tightened the noose around himself, providing his hunters with the data they needed for the final operation. By the time 2009 drew to a close, the inevitability of Sadiq Raza's fate hung heavy in the air. His name surfaced in conversations whispered among intelligence officers in Cairo, Amman, and Tel Aviv. Western diplomats spoke cautiously of the recruiter in Sudan, a figure whose movements attracted satellites, informants, and watchful eyes. Every escape, every narrow survival, seemed less like a triumph and more like the tightening spiral of destiny. Friends noticed subtle changes in his demeanor. He lingered less in public, kept curtains drawn even in unfamiliar hotels, and moved as though every shadow might conceal a watcher. yet he refused to abandon his mission. "If I am taken," he reportedly told one associate, "then it is written. But until then, the work must continue." For Mossad planners, the calculus was cold and precise. He had become too valuable to Hamas, too dangerous to ignore, too visible to leave untouched. Files circulated with red stamps reading priority. Maps of Khartoum hotels were studied, routines logged, weaknesses catalogued. The stage was set. The final act was no longer a question of if but when, a ticking countdown toward the silent strike that would end his life. The story of Sadiq Raza cannot be separated from the larger battlefield that defined his life. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, stretching back to 1948, was the crucible from which Hamas emerged. Decades of displacement, occupation, and failed negotiations created the conditions in which militancy thrived. Gaza, with its crowded streets and endless blockades, became both a prison and a proving ground, where every generation grew up under siege and every family carried scars of war. By the 1980s, the rise of Hamas as both a social and militant movement shifted the dynamics of the conflict. Unlike the secular nationalists of the PLO, Hamas drew strength from religious legitimacy, framing its struggle as not only political, but divine. This framing resonated deeply in Gaza and beyond, binding faith to armed resistance. When Hamas took control of Gaza in 2007, it established a rival authority to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, fracturing Palestinian politics while hardening the conflict with Israel. For Israel, this meant a new, relentless adversary committed to its destruction. For Palestinians, it meant division, but also defiance, as Hamas positioned itself as the vanguard of resistance. Every clash, every rocket, and every assassination attempt was part of a larger cycle where military force met ideological certainty. Sudan entered this conflict quietly, as a distant ally. During the 1990s, Khartoum offered sanctuary to groups hostile to Israel, from al-Qaeda to Hamas. Though Sudan later shifted politically, networks rooted during that era survived, making the country a safe passage for smuggling and a discreet base for operatives like Raza. Thus, his presence in Khartoum was not an anomaly, but the product of decades of intersecting conflicts, each reinforcing the other. The death of Sadiq Raza and the operations that preceded it unfolded within a web of competing national agendas. Each country involved in the wider conflict saw in him either a threat or an asset, shaping their strategies accordingly. For Israel, the calculus was stark. Figures like Raza symbolized the perpetuation of Hamas's war machine. Eliminating him was not simply about weakening recruitment, but about projecting deterrence. Every targeted killing served as a message. No recruiter, financier, or commander was beyond reach regardless of borders. Israel viewed Sudan as both a vulnerability and an opportunity. A weak state where operations could be mounted with relative deniability. For Sudan, the presence of men like Raza was both liability and leverage. Officially, Khartoum distanced itself from militant groups after the 1990s, yet networks persisted in the shadows, tolerated when politically convenient. Sudanese intelligence occasionally exploited these networks for financial gain, while maintaining plausible deniability. Raza's death placed Sudan in an awkward position, caught between foreign intelligence penetrations and its own fragile sovereignty. Egypt occupied a delicate middle ground. With its role as mediator in Israeli-Palestinian talks, Cairo tolerated certain Hamas channels while cracking down on others. Egypt's intelligence services tracked Raza's movements cautiously, wary of destabilization spilling into Sinai, yet reluctant to fully sever links that provided leverage in negotiations. Iran viewed figures like Raza as indispensable connectors, part of the wider axis of resistance stretching from Tehran to Gaza. His recruitment pipelines and smuggling routes aligned perfectly with Iran's strategy of arming Hamas as a counterweight to Israel. Tehran's support ensured that even after setbacks, networks could regenerate, making him a vital cog in their regional ambitions. Meanwhile, Western powers such as the United States and European Union saw him as a destabilizer undermining counterterrorism efforts. Though they lacked the operational reach of Mossad, they contributed intelligence, financial tracking, and diplomatic cover that bolstered Israel's campaign. In this geopolitical chessboard, Raza's life became collateral in broader rivalries. Each country's position sharpened the inevitability of his fate, for none could afford to leave his networks unchecked. Sadiq Raza mattered because he embodied the connective tissue that kept Hamas resilient. Unlike frontline commanders whose deaths could be replaced with younger fighters, his skills were rare: persuasion, organization, and the ability to bridge ideological conviction with logistical execution. He was not simply a recruiter of men, but a recruiter of loyalty, binding individuals into a cause greater than themselves. His work ensured that Hamas's ranks did not thin after assassinations or arrests. Every martyr was replaced, sometimes twofold, by youths who had passed through his quiet sessions in mosques, cafes, or safe houses. In the logic of insurgency, such recruitment was as important as weaponry. Without men to wield arms, the arms were useless. Beyond personnel, Raza's role in establishing international pipelines amplified his significance. He operated as a middleman between Hamas leadership and external patrons, particularly in Sudan and Iran. By linking financial flows, safe havens, and weapons routes, he gave the organization depth beyond Gaza's besieged borders. His networks blurred the line between local insurgency and regional proxy war, elevating Hamas from isolated resistance to a player in Middle Eastern geopolitics. For Israel, his elimination was therefore not symbolic but strategic. Removing him meant severing arteries that fed the militant body. For Hamas, his loss was catastrophic, a rupture in the infrastructure of survival. And for intelligence services worldwide, his story illustrated the importance of individuals in shaping the course of conflicts that often seem driven only by states. Ultimately, Raza mattered because he was both invisible and indispensable. He wielded no titles, commanded no brigades, yet his presence shaped events across borders. His death in a Khartoum hotel room was not the silencing of a man, but the disruption of a system, one that had threatened to outlast even the fiercest wars. The hunt for Sadiq Raza reached its climax in April 2009, when Mossad greenlit an operation on Sudanese soil. Preparations had stretched back months, with agents shadowing his movements through Khartoum, Port Sudan, and sporadic trips into Eritrea. When intelligence confirmed he had booked a suite at the Coral Continental Hotel, the plan moved into execution. On April 14th, 3 operatives arrived in Khartoum on separate commercial flights. Traveling under European passports, they blended with businessmen and aid workers, their covers carefully rehearsed. One presented himself as a Belgian consultant with ties to agricultural firms, another as an Italian engineer contracted for water projects. The third, their coordinator, posed as a Canadian academic researching regional conflicts. Their luggage contained no weapons, only clothing and electronics, indistinguishable from any traveler's belongings. From the airport, they scattered into different hotels across the city. Contact was avoided in public, with coordination handled through encrypted laptops disguised as ordinary consumer devices. Within hours, they had surveyed the Coral Continental, mapping entrances, fire escapes, and blind spots in the surveillance system. Raza was already under loose surveillance by Sudanese intelligence, but Mossad operatives moved with precision, slipping beneath local notice. Over the next 2 days, they blended into Khartoum's bustle, shopping in markets, sipping tea at cafes, attending staged meetings with contacts who existed only on paper. Beneath the veneer of normalcy, every action was calculated. They were hunters in plain sight, waiting for the precise moment when shadows and opportunity would converge. On the evening of April 15, 2009, the operatives quietly began to converge around the Coral Continental Hotel. One checked in under the guise of a European trade delegate, requesting a corner suite on the 5th floor, with a clear line of sight to the lobby. Another secured a modest single room 2 floors below, positioned directly beneath Raza's reserved suite. The third did not check in at all but frequented the hotel bar and cafe, posing as a visiting academic who preferred long hours of writing in public spaces. Their surveillance began with patience. They mapped Raza's movements, noting his habits, the time he returned from evening meetings, his preference for room service tea, and his tendency to leave the curtains drawn at night. Security cameras provided only partial coverage, and the operatives exploited blind corridors where they could move unseen. They tested staff routines, slipping tips to cleaners for updates on when the suite was serviced. The team also planted discreet monitoring devices. A modified power adapter, left innocuously in a hallway socket, transmitted audio snippets from nearby rooms. A disguised USB charger, accidentally left in the bar, relayed wireless signals from guest devices. Layer by layer, Raza's privacy unraveled until his daily existence became transparent to strangers who never exchanged a word with him. From their temporary command post in a rented apartment, they built a timetable of his life in Khartoum. He was cautious, but routine betrayed him. By the night of April 16th, Mossad had determined the exact window when he would be most vulnerable. Alone in his suite, curtains closed, phone switched off, believing he was safe in a city far from Gaza, April 17, 2009, began with deceptive calm. The Coral Continental buzzed with the usual flow of diplomats, aid workers, and businessmen. Raza attended a discreet morning meeting with a Sudanese intermediary, returning to his suite shortly before noon. He remained inside most of the afternoon, occupied with calls to contacts in Gaza and coded emails routed through servers in Yemen. To outside eyes, it was an ordinary day of quiet work. The Mossad operatives followed their practice choreography. The academic lingered in the lobby cafe, casually scanning arrivals. The engineer staged a phone call near the elevators, a plausible excuse for loitering. The delegate remained in his room above the lobby, observing movements through a gap in the curtains. Each gesture seemed ordinary, yet each was a piece of the invisible net tightening around the target. By evening, Raza returned from prayers at a local mosque, appearing calm but weary. At 9:30 p.m., he ordered tea from room service. The delivery, logged by staff, was the last confirmed interaction anyone outside the operation had with him. Minutes later, the hall outside his suite briefly flickered on CCTV as two men passed by, one disguised as a maintenance worker, the other blending with a group of departing guests. Inside the suite, the execution was swift and silent. The operatives used a master keycard cloned earlier from hotel staff. One secured the hallway, while the other entered, carrying only a small kit disguised as a toiletry bag. Raza had settled into bed, reading documents spread across his lap. What followed took less than 10 minutes. A chemical agent administered discreetly, a body eased into stillness, and papers rearranged to suggest fatigue overtaking a man at work. At precisely 9:47 p.m., the operatives exited separately, their movements lost amid the night's ordinary rhythms. By the time hotel staff cleared trays from the hallway, Sadiq Raza was already dead, another victim in a war waged without declarations, where assassinations unfolded as quietly as whispers. The operation that ended Sadiq Raza's life relied less on brute force and more on precision engineering, the hallmarks of Mossad tradecraft. Entry into his suite was achieved using a cloned keycard, created after operatives discreetly accessed a hotel staff terminal earlier that week. The duplication was invisible to hotel systems, allowing entry without triggering alerts. Inside, the tools were compact, concealed within a toiletry bag indistinguishable from a traveler's kit. Among them was a syringe fitted with a microneedle, designed to deliver a near-invisible puncture. The chemical agent used, believed to be a fast-acting muscle relaxant combined with a cardiac suppressant, was chosen for its ability to mimic natural cardiac arrest. Within minutes, respiration slowed, heartbeat faltered, and consciousness slipped away without leaving visible struggle. Other devices were defensive. A handheld jammer disrupted wireless signals for a radius of several meters, silencing potential surveillance microphones. A modified smartphone app monitored hallway CCTV loops, ensuring that the brief window of entry and exit coincided with periods of interference. Even the disposal of equipment was calculated. Gloves, swabs, and empty vials were packed into a collapsible thermal bag, later incinerated in a rented safe house. The elegance of the tools lay in their deniability. No gunshots, no shattered glass, no visible wounds. Only a man found lifeless, his heart stilled in a hotel room. For investigators, the scene would whisper of natural causes, yet every detail bore the invisible fingerprints of a professional kill. Night tightened around the Coral Continental as tensions braided into silence, every footstep amplified by hotel tiles. Operatives moved like instruments in a silent orchestra, timing breaths and steps to an invisible metronome. The city outside remained oblivious to fate. Close calls threaded the operation. A concierge lingering too long, a maintenance cart blocking view, a guest returning unexpectedly. Each near miss was catalogued and folded into contingency, prompting adaptations that preserved the plan while raising adrenaline among the team. Moments stretched into slow motion as operatives synchronized watches and reassessed risk. A single misstep would cascade into exposure, yet their training substituted fear with focus. Cameras, staff routines, pedestrian traffic were all instruments in a choreography to mask intent. Inside the suite, seconds became an eternity. The operative moved with economy, each action rehearsed until muscle memory eclipsed thought. Paperwork was tidied, the bedside light dimmed, a silence descended, and the agent prepared to perform the final, irreversible act. Escape routes were already plotted with taxi licenses, forged receipts, staggered departures, and passports prepared for scrutiny. The operatives melted into Khartoum night, blending with ordinary travelers, leaving behind only a quiet warning about the final price of clandestine warfare. At 9:43 p.m., the suite door whispered shut, sealing Sadiq Raza's final moments. He reclined against the headboard, papers scattered across his lap, unaware of the shadow approaching. A soft sting at the base of his neck, subtle and precise, was the only sign of intrusion. Within moments, the chemical agent coursed through his bloodstream, silencing nerves, paralyzing muscles, and lulling his body into stillness. His eyes fluttered, confusion overtaking awareness, but no words escaped. To the outside world, it would appear fatigue had claimed him mid-study. His breathing slowed, heartbeat faltered, and in less than 5 minutes, silence reigned. The operatives repositioned him gently, as if sleep had overcome him, tidying the scene with clinical detachment. Curtains were drawn tight, bedside lamp dimmed, and documents arranged to suggest late-night work interrupted by exhaustion. By 9:47 p.m., the room looked ordinary again, the hum of the air conditioner masking the stillness within. The assassin slipped into the corridor, vanishing into the anonymity of hotel guests. When staff discovered him the next morning, they would find not a battlefield victim, but a man claimed by what appeared to be his own heart, a death staged as ordinary, masking extraordinary design. Morning at the Coral Continental Hotel unfolded as any other. Breakfast trays clattering, staff hurrying through corridors, guests preparing for flights. But on April 18, 2009, silence fell on the 5th floor when a housekeeper knocked repeatedly on the door of Suite 512. Receiving no answer, she entered with a passkey. Inside, she found Sadiq Raza slumped in bed, papers still scattered across his lap, the room unnervingly calm. Initial shock quickly gave way to procedure. The hotel manager arrived, directing staff to secure the area while discreet calls were made to local police. Rumors spread even before the first officials arrived, whispers that the deceased was no ordinary guest. Guests noticed the sudden presence of plainclothesmen near the elevators, speaking hurriedly into radios. By midday, the suite was sealed, corridors blocked, and staff instructed to remain silent. Official statements described a guest found dead of apparent natural causes, but inconsistencies already gnawed at the narrative. Why had embassy personnel appeared before police investigators? Why was the body swiftly transported to a government facility, bypassing routine hospital protocols? What should have been a mundane discovery of a man succumbing to heart failure was already taking shape as something darker, layered with secrecy and suspicion. At the Khartoum government mortuary, doctors conducted a swift examination of Sadiq Raza's body. The initial report listed cardiac arrest as the cause of death, citing no visible trauma or external injuries. To officials, it appeared routine. A middle-aged man, fatigued from travel, claimed by natural causes. Yet whispers began among medical staff who noticed anomalies. The injection mark was nearly invisible, a faint red dot at the base of the neck, easily dismissed as a mosquito bite. Toxicological screening, limited by Sudan's outdated facilities, revealed nothing conclusive. No poisons, no narcotics, no alcohol. To the untrained eye, the body spoke of exhaustion, not assassination. Still, inconsistencies lingered. His lungs showed unusual constriction, and his heart displayed sudden collapse rather than gradual failure. Colleagues quietly suggested the possibility of a chemical agent, but such theories were suppressed under pressure from Sudanese security officials eager to close the case. The final report, sanitized and released within 48 hours, declared no foul play. Yet behind closed doors, intelligence officers doubted the findings. The speed of the burial, the silence imposed on staff, and the lack of independent review only deepened suspicions. Raza's death remained unresolved, his body a mute witness to a concealed execution. Days after the death, investigators quietly reviewed the CCTV footage from the Coral Continental Hotel. At first, nothing seemed unusual, grainy images of guests, staff, and ordinary comings and goings. But upon closer inspection, discrepancies emerged. Cameras that normally ran without interruption displayed brief gaps, unexplained static precisely during the minutes surrounding 9:40 to 9:50 p.m. on the night of Raza's death. Hotel staff recalled unfamiliar guests who paid in cash and checked out immediately after the incident. Their passports, European, Canadian, and Australian, were later flagged as forgeries. Immigration records revealed the same identities had been used in other countries in previous years, suggesting a coordinated network of false documents. The revelation mirrored earlier scandals, where Mossad operatives were linked to forged passports in operations stretching from Jordan to Dubai. The Sudanese press, heavily monitored, released nothing. But foreign intelligence circles buzzed. Reports leaked of at least 8 forged identities tied to the Khartoum operation, each linked to flights arriving days before the assassination. Airlines quietly confirmed that one passport number was simultaneously recorded in 2 different cities, a clear sign of fabrication. This passport scandal became the first solid clue that Raza's death was no accident. Western diplomats privately pressed Sudanese officials for answers, but Khartoum remained silent, unwilling to admit foreign agents had penetrated its capital so easily. The scandal underscored the reach of an invisible hand, one skilled at erasing traces, yet leaving just enough anomalies to confirm suspicion. In intelligence corridors, the phrase circulated, "Khartoum was compromised." The discovery of forged passports and suspicious CCTV gaps ignited quiet fury in diplomatic circles. Sudan lodged formal complaints, though carefully worded to avoid directly accusing Israel. Officials feared exposing how easily foreign operatives had penetrated Khartoum would undermine the regime's already fragile legitimacy. Publicly, they called it a tragedy, but internally, they recognized it as an intelligence humiliation. Israel, as expected, neither confirmed nor denied involvement. Officials in Tel Aviv dismissed questions with practiced silence, repeating the familiar refrain, "We do not comment on security operations." Yet the timing of leaks and the precision of the operation matched Mossad's unmistakable signature, leaving little doubt in the minds of regional analysts. In Europe, outrage focused less on the assassination itself than on the forged passports. Governments demanded explanations, quietly expelling suspected Mossad officers while issuing public condemnations. Memories of earlier scandals, particularly in Dubai, resurfaced, painting a picture of systematic document manipulation. The scandal strained relations but fell short of concrete sanctions. Iran reacted with open anger, declaring Raza a martyr and blaming the West for collusion with Israel. In Gaza, Hamas organized rallies, presenting his death as proof of their enemies' fear. Recruitment briefly surged, fueled by the myth of a man hunted by global powers. For Washington and allied capitals, the fallout was managed carefully. Privately, officials acknowledged relief at Raza's removal, seeing it as a blow to Hamas's external networks. Publicly, they condemned violations of sovereignty, maintaining a delicate balance between deniability and tacit approval. The world moved on quickly, but the message lingered. A hotel room in Khartoum had become a battlefield in the shadow war. Borders, laws, and passports offered no protection once Mossad marked a name for elimination.